So let's get started with just a brief history about Missouri, and then we'll move on. Missouri was the 24th state admitted to the Union in 1821, and this year, on August the 10th, we will celebrate 200 years. And originally, if you'll look at the slide there for just a moment, originally the borders of Missouri were not intended as they are today. The original proposal was for the state line to be in line with the Kentucky-Tennessee state lines. So as you can see from the slide, that would have completely cut off the boot heel. And there's actually a funny history about the boot heel. The people that lived there didn't want the state line there. They didn't want to be part of Arkansas. And I'm going to read this because I'm quoting. They said, "It's so sickly in Arkansas. It's full of bears and panthers and copperhead snakes. So it ain't safe for civilized people to stay there overnight even." They didn't want any part of Arkansas. So that's how the boot heel came to be. If you live in the boot heel or are originally from there, people don't say boot heel, they say boot hill. So that's just, so you're speaking properly if you're from there. It's boot hill, not heel. And if you'll move to slide 4 for me, the flat farmland we see today was not a work of nature. The boot heel of Missouri was full of swamps, trees, wetlands, and in the 1890s, the lumbering moved in. They cleared out all the trees, and then they decided to drain the swamp. Some people call it Swamp East Missouri. What they did in 1905, they started building the Little River Drainage District. And if you'll look at this image, you can see those fine blue lines that are going vertically in that image. Those are drainage ditches, and they are named drainage ditch number 1, number 2, number 3, and so on. So keep in mind that the Mississippi watershed, which we're talking about the Mississippi River, drains 41% of the continental US. That's a lot of water. Those ditches handle a lot of water. It took years to complete that drainage system. The soil, once they got the water out, was very rich from the sediment of the water, multitudes of floods over the decades. After they drained the swamp, originally Missouri was full of family farms growing wheat. And unfortunately, in the 20s, the boll weevil destroyed the cotton crop in Arkansas. So the farmers moved the cotton to Southeast Missouri, and along with them, they brought thousands of sharecroppers. And King Cotton took over. Yeah, let's move on to slide 5. Let's back up just a minute. Now, this is an aerial view of a couple of the drainage ditches. And then if you'll move to 6, they'll really get a good view of it. And they are, as I said, appropriately named ditch 1, 2, 3, and so on. And this particular image is at Hornersville, Missouri. So all that farmland around those drainage ditches was underwater. And then, as I was saying, in the 20s, the boll weevil destroyed the cotton crop in the South. So they moved into Missouri with their sharecroppers. And by the 1930s, the boot heel produced 98.5% of Missouri's cotton. That's a lot of cotton. everything for the state, 98% of it was grown in the boot heel. Now, sharecropping, let me explain just a little bit. Sharecroppers were predominantly freed slaves, although there were many white sharecroppers as well. And in researching this story, I noticed on the census records that everyone was listed as a farmer. You go down the line on the census records, it's farmer, farmer, farmer. The thing is, it's very misleading because these people essentially were farmers, but they were not landowners. They were sharecroppers or tenant farmers or laborers. They didn't own any land. And we'll explain sharecropping in more depth in part 2. But it was a no-win situation for the sharecroppers. They barely survived. All right, the 1920s brought more than cotton to the boot heel. The decade also brought prohibition. And the area was full of remote settlements, away from paved roads and prying eyes. And trust me, it was a written invitation for bootlegging. And I don't hold anything against bootlegging as I look back through history, especially during the Depression. People had to make a living. They were trying to feed their families. They were trying to grow crops. And if they could drive a load of whiskey over the state line and get away with it, you know, that might buy food for their family for the next week. So I find it very interesting how people succeeded. And I'm going to tell you, the state line may have kept the snakes and bears out of Missouri, but it was no match for the whiskey and beer. People want their beer. In 1928, for instance, undercover prohibition agents filed documents in federal district court regarding liquor law violations. Every county in Southeast Missouri was listed. Pemiscot County was number 1. Now we're going to talk about a man named Harry Bailey. For Harry Bailey, along with others along the state line of Missouri and Arkansas, let's go to slide 7. He provided everything needed to make money with alcohol. Number 7. Yeah, back up one slide. No. We'll find it in a second, folks. Give us just a minute. It's a map. There you go. There you go. If you'll look at this map, you'll see Harry Bailey's establishment was in Holland, Missouri. And if you can see that Missouri-Arkansas state line, there were 3 bars there. Harry Bailey's was the Curve Inn, and then there was an establishment called the Crescent, let's see, what was it? Can't remember. Oh, I'll find it. Well, we'll get to it in a minute. We'll move on. So Harry Bailey had the Curve Inn, and Harry was very popular in the community. And if you can see how close Holland is to the state line, it didn't take but a few minutes to get from Arkansas, where the liquor was, into Missouri, and then it was distributed from there. There are so many stories about Pemiscot County and their liquor transportation. Harry was well liked in the remote community of Holland. He was known as a man of his word, but not a man to be trifled with. The man was 6 foot tall, 250 pounds, and he took no scuff from anybody. And trust me, he had a rap sheet ranging from gambling, felonious assault, contempt of court, notorious affairs, conspiracy to violate prohibition laws, which actually his co-conspirators in those charges were local law enforcement officers. There was even some records of murder for Harry. yet everybody liked him. And he was personally acquainted with the local law enforcement. This is an image of Harry Bailey's bar, cafe, service station. And if you'll move on to the next slide, there was also a ballpark behind the bar. So this was the local happening place. People would go there for ball games, listen to the jukebox, have a few drinks. So that was the place to be. But I'm going to tell you, where Harry was, he was like a stormy petrel. Wherever he was, there was bound to be excitement. So we've gone on. The three establishments were the Curve Inn, the Silver Moon, and the Crescent nightclub. These were border rivalries. There were drive-by shootings, truck hijackings, physical altercations by henchmen. You would not believe the things I found about Harry Bailey's place. He was known as King of the Borderland. The state line between Arkansas and Missouri was the borderland, and Harry was the king. And there are many stories that I could share with you about Harry Bailey. But tonight we're going to focus on one of his employees and the most heinous crime to occur during his reign as king. Move on to slide 10 for me, please. This is a photograph of the gentleman sitting down was William Vaughn. The lady's name was Dora Delk Vaughn. And then on the left there is Gay Vaughn. Gay was the youngest child of William and Dora. He was also, when he grew into an adult, he was a fourth generation sharecropper. He was born in Oklahoma in 1904 in the Oklahoma Territory. I found his maternal grandmother listed on the Dawes Roll as Cherokee by blood, which explains to me how the family came to be in Oklahoma. If you know a little bit of history, the Indian Removal Act of 1830 had expelled the Native Americans from the East, from Georgia and South Carolina, along the Trail of Tears, and they settled them in Oklahoma. And truly, this heritage, along with being a fourth generation sharecropper, pretty much guaranteed that the road ahead of him was not going to be paved with privilege. Can we move on to the next slide? This is another image of Dora and William. Yeah. Okay, sometime between 1910 and 1920, the Vaughn family relocated to the Boot Heel in Missouri. Historically, sharecroppers lived lives like nomads. They would move wherever the crop was. They would move wherever they thought they might get a better harvest and make a little more money. And the Vaughn family settled in Holland, Missouri, along with other family members. My research shows that at least Gay, Dora, and William lived in Holland. And there were some cousins sprinkled about in the Boot Heel. And Gay could read and write. He attended a school called 10 Mile Island School. He had no formal education, but it wasn't uncommon for kids to be pulled out of school to help the family for harvest or planting time. As he grew into an adult, he learned the skills of a blacksmith and mechanic. And he did this along with farming. Every census record I can find reflects Gay as a farmer. In 1926, Gay married Mary Price. That's her in the image you're looking at now. This, to my knowledge, is the only photo of them together. Mary was a widow. She had 6 daughters and 1 son from her first husband, who died suddenly in 1924. She and Gay married in 1926. She was 11 years Gay's senior, and she was a very attractive woman, as you can see. He was farming and working as a blacksmith while Mary kept house, and she had two daughters still at home, ages 2 and 10. When they first get married, that's how old the remaining two girls were, age 2 and 10. Now, Gay Vaughn and Harry Bailey had been friends since boyhood. Records indicate that Gay worked for Harry Bailey at the Curve Inn, but I can't find anything that says exactly in what capacity he worked for Harry. Possibly a mechanic at the service station, possibly just worked at the service station waiting on customers. There was, as you remember, a cafe and a bar. I also found records that Gay evidently made some extra money as a bouncer in the area. He worked at several bars along with Harry Bailey's. The only thing I can deduce is that he was either a mechanic. He was also working as a blacksmith during the day, but I can't confirm what he did for Harry Bailey. I can't find any kind of police records for Gay. Maybe he was just a really good bootlegger. I don't know, but I think it's endearing either way. So we'll move on now. Okay, Gay's mother, Dora, passed away in 1931. His father remained in Holland, and he lived near Gay and Mary, and they continued cotton farming. Gay and Mary survived the Great Depression, 1929, 1933. The oldest of the two daughters, still at home, married and left in 1933. This left Gay, Mary, and her 9-year-old daughter. The future really looked better for them when the Depression ended, but that's not how it all went down. We're going to move forward now to 1938. And for those of you that might be listening and not viewing, I will read this content warning for you. Before we move on to the next section, please be advised that some viewers may find the subject matter sensitive and it may be inappropriate for a young audience. So I'll give you just a moment if you need to send the kids outside to play. We're going to move forward to Sunday, September 11th, 1938. Everything I can find tells me that Gay and Mary set out for an evening of entertainment that Sunday. Their plan was to attend a ball game at Harry Bailey's at the Curve Inn, have a few drinks, enjoy the jukebox maybe. They stopped by the bar before the game and then moved to the ballpark a short distance behind the bar. After the game, they returned to the bar. And among the other guests at the bar that night was a man named Arch Patterson. There was bad blood between Arch and Gay. There had been an incident or two between them. Not sure which bar it was out of the three, but Gay as a bouncer, my guess is possibly he had to remove Arch from a bar and Arch was holding a grudge. We don't, nobody really knows. For a time, the evening was uneventful for Gay and Mary. And then the morning of September 12th, 1938, walking to work around 8 a.m. that Monday, a female employee of Harry's found an unconscious man outside behind the bar. His face and head covered in blood. She tried to wake him up. She got no response but weak groaning. So she summoned Lily, Harry Bailey's wife, and Harry and Lily came to where the man lay. Harry Bailey then identified this terribly injured man as Gay. He summoned an ambulance from Blytheville and called for the sheriff, John Holzler. We'll move to number 14. That's the sheriff, John Holzler in Pemiscot County. A Bailey employee and Harry carried Gay inside the bar and placed him on a couch. Gay's head was bleeding from several deep gashes and evidently an eye injury. Harry Bailey tried his best to get some kind of response from Gay, asking him, "Who did it, buddy?" Gay only uttered one word, and that word was taxi. Let's try and remember that one word because it's really going to be revealing shortly. When Sheriff Holzler and State Trooper Cletus Bidewell arrived, and that's Cletus in the image you're looking at now, State Trooper, Bailey told him that Gay worked for him. The sheriff asked the Bailey employees to immediately go to Gay's home and advise his wife that Gay was seriously injured. The ambulance arrived, and as they were loading Gay into the ambulance, the attendants told the sheriff that they didn't think Gay was going to make it to the hospital. His injuries were too severe. So the sheriff and Trooper Bidewell decided to follow the ambulance to the hospital. When they got to the hospital, they tried to get in to talk to Gay, but Gay was rushed into surgery upon arrival, and they weren't allowed to speak with him. They were at the hospital all day. When Gay came out of surgery, the doctor told Holzler and Bidewell that he didn't expect Gay to live through the night. He gave Gay one chance in 100 of surviving these injuries. Gay had suffered a fracture at the base of his skull, a severe eye injury, and numerous lacerations. Describing Gay's injuries, the doctor explained that the impact of the fracture had reached Gay's cerebral cortex. And if you'll go to slide 16, I can explain that a little bit. You see where the cerebellum is at the back of this image. That whatever had happened to Gay, he had been struck in the back there, but the impact had fractured his skull and made it all the way into that section that appears green in this image, which is your seat of conscious thought and memory. So that's how hard he had been struck. It had put pressure on this part of his brain. And the doctors told the sheriff if he lived, he would never recall what happened before the attack or during it. And the officers were turned away, so they started driving back to Holland. When they arrived back at the bar, of course, the sheriff wanted to go there immediately and see what he could find out. When they arrived back at the bar, it was about 6:30 in the evening. There was a crowd of people surrounding something back by the ball field. So the sheriff and the trooper pushed their way through the crowd and came upon a grisly sight. Crumpled on the ground was a young woman in horrible condition. Several in the crowd shouted to the sheriff, "It's Mary, it's Mary." Furious at the crowd for trampling the crime scene, Sheriff Holzler and Bidewell pushed them back, and the sheriff was informed by Harry that the body was Gay's wife, Mary. Bailey told him they'd sent people to Gay's home earlier in the day as he had requested, but they were told by Mary's 15-year-old daughter that she had never returned home the night before. When Bailey received this information, they organized people and started searching for her. They found items of her clothing scattered along behind the bar, and that's what eventually led them to her. And of course, at this point, the coroner was summoned. And while they waited for the coroner, the sheriff and Trooper Bidwell searched for clues. Their discoveries included a 3-foot-long 2x4 by Mary's body that was covered in blood. There were many footprints from the crowd, but they found one set of footprints heading to the highway made with what appeared to be new shoes. Evidence in the vegetation and dirt indicated that Mary had been carried about 100 yards and then dragged another 100 yards. Her body was about 200 yards from where Gay was found. It had rained the night before, and Sheriff Hosler noted that the ground beneath Mary was dry, and this would later help him establish an approximate time of Mary's death. The crime grew even more heinous after the coroner arrived. According to the coroner, Mary's entire body was beaten, cut, and bruised, and she had been choked. Apparently, she'd been dragged feet first through the cinders on the ball field as there were cinders embedded in her skin. She was covered in blood from her head to her knees, her head having been struck repeatedly with a blunt object and fractured numerous times, almost beyond recognition. The sheriff responded with sad disgust when the coroner informed him that Mary had been repeatedly brutalized before and after her death. Well, as you can imagine, the sheriff and Trooper Bidwell wasted no time launching this investigation. It was a disturbing crime, and they were determined. So he immediately asked Harry Bailey for a list of everyone he could remember being in the bar the night before. That would have been Sunday, September 11th. They continued searching for clues after Mary's body was taken away. So far, they had the 2x4, the footprints leading to the highway, and the path through which Mary had been dragged through the vegetation. As a whole, this was nothing to go on. Harry compiled a list to the best of his recollection of those at the bar that night. Hosler and Bidwell immediately began talking to everyone they could find. Now, this is a rural area, so they had some miles to travel to get from person to person and find people to question them. But the sheriff immediately believed that they were looking for two suspects. He said there was no way someone could have attacked Mary and struck Gay from behind at the same time. Someone had to restrain her and attack him. It had to be two people. He believed they were looking for two suspects. And according to the witnesses the sheriff and the trooper talked to, sometime during the early evening, Arch Patterson approached Gay and Mary's table and instigated an argument with Gay. During the altercation, Arch apparently drew back in an attempt to strike Gay, but he was restrained by a third person, at which time Arch, referring to Gay, threatened to cut his damn throat, and I quote. He also announced that he was going to get Gay and his wife. It's really not clear at all what Arch's grudge against Gay was, but he was serious about it. After the confrontation, Arch returned to the table he was sharing with his friends, and their names were Adrian Posey, slide 17. This is Adrian Posey. He was a young man, I believe 23 at the time. And another man by the name of Otis Goose Fowler. He was obviously older than Adrian. I couldn't find any images of Arch Patterson, but this guy Fowler had been arrested in 1933 for armed bank robbery in Steele, I believe. Beyond that, there's not a lot of information out there about these three men. I couldn't find any history on Adrian, and only that little bit about Otis Fowler. Well, by September 13th, 1938, the Associated Press had picked up this story. The local and statewide newspapers exploded with information and speculation. If you'll go to slide 19, one local newspaper even used the headline, "Funeral for Mob Victim Held at Steele Tuesday." This had nothing to do with the mob, nothing at all. This was an isolated incident, but to see this sensationalism back in 1938, I was a little bit surprised, but I guess sensationalism's been around a lot longer than I realized it. But because of the murder's association with Harry Bailey, the rumor mill was working overtime. And Hosler and Bidwell were still diligently searching for witnesses and clues. Let's move on. Let's go back to Gay. As the days went by, Gay remained in a coma in the hospital in Blytheville. The sheriff and Trooper Bidwell traveled to the hospital daily in an attempt to talk to him. They were either turned away, or if they were allowed in the room, Gay was unresponsive. Mary's funeral was held on September 13th, 1938, while Gay was still in a coma. By September 14th, as a result of witness interviews, the sheriff had his suspects: Arch Patterson, Adrian Posey, and Otis Fowler. Patterson and Fowler were arrested, and Posey turned himself in on September 15th. I was really proud of the sheriff when I found that in the interview with these suspects, Sheriff Hosler told them, "Start talking or all of you will go to the gas chamber in Jeff City, and that gas chamber gets awfully stuffy." Well, Fowler stated he was too drunk to remember what happened, but he did know a truck driver that saw Mary alive around midnight on the 11th. Hosler corrected him by informing him that Mary was dead before 11:30. Fowler was stunned, asking the sheriff how he knew that. Hosler informed him that when Mary was found, the ground around her was damp, but the ground underneath her was dry. Hosler told Fowler, "I got the weather report. It rained at 11:30. He also enlightened Fowler that he knew what he had done. "You see," Hosler said, "the footprints headed to the highway were made with new shoes, just like the ones you're wearing right now." Adrian Posey, at this point, asked the sheriff, "If you're so sure the killer is Fowler, why are you keeping the rest of us? I've got a cab business to run." Addressing Adrian Posey, Hosler said, "Your footprints were mixed in with the crowd's footprints headed back to the bar because you had to return there to get your taxi." It was at this point that Arch Patterson agreed to make a statement. The rest of what I'm going to share with you is according to Arch Patterson's statement. Fowler, encouraged by his bravery in a bottle, informed Posey early in the evening, "I'm bound to have a woman tonight, and I don't care who it is or how." Posey told Patterson that he had a date with Mary. Whether Mary was aware of this date or Posey just picked her out of the crowd is unknown. Between 10:30 and 11, authorities assume that Mary left the bar to visit the facilities near the ballpark. Now, keep in mind, this was 1938. There were outhouses behind the bar. There were no indoor restrooms at that time. As she was exiting the bar, Posey bragged to Fowler, and I quote, "This is it, boy. I said I'd make that, and I don't care how I do it." At that, Posey left his table to follow Mary. Seeing Posey behind his wife, Gay followed him. Fowler then left the table and got behind Gay. A minute or two later, Arch Patterson decided he needed fresh air and exited by the same door as the others. Again, according to Arch's statement, when he stepped outside, he didn't go any further than just outside the door. He stated that he didn't see anything, but he heard muffled sobs, the sound of feet running, and stifled groans. He heard a woman's voice begging, "Please don't. You're hurting me. Please let me go. And oh, don't do that." He heard a man's voice say, "Don't do that to my wife." Apparently, according to his statement, none of this concerned him because he went back inside after getting fresh air for just a moment. However, later in court, he testified that he did, in fact, go behind the bar toward the ballpark to visit the men's facilities. Further, he did see the group by the ballpark and did witness Posey holding Mary's arm and Fowler and Gay in a scuffle. He also witnessed Fowler strike Gay more than once. Further, Arch stated that Posey and Fowler re-entered the bar and asked him to go to the Silver Moon, another one of the state line bars, if you'll remember. During the ride to the other bar, Arch chastised Fowler for driving erratically, and Fowler answered, "It makes no difference if we die. For what I've done, I could have a home for the rest of my life." Well, if it's not obvious to you yet, Arch Patterson was not a reliable witness. He was seen by witnesses with two others outside the bar between midnight and 1. Patterson, Fowler, and Posey were also seen re-entering the bar together at around 4 a.m. You might believe at this point that the case was solved for the most part and ready to be tried in court. That wasn't the case, however. Everything was still in limbo. Whether or not Gay would survive was yet to be seen. If he didn't survive, there would be another murder charge. If he did survive, they needed to find out what Gay knew if he could identify his attackers. So everything was still in limbo, and only time was going to answer those questions. Patterson, Fowler, and Posey were held without bond until it was clear that Gay would live. This took a long time. Gay was in a coma for 5 days. Finally, on September 16th, he regained partial consciousness. Again, he mumbled the single word, "taxi." September 21st, Gay was only able to sit up. He was conscious. He was released from the hospital and transported to Harry Bailey's place to recuperate. At the time of his release from the hospital, he didn't yet know about his wife's death. Hosler and Bidwell, on one of their many visits, asked Gay a question about the night of September 11th, and his response was, "I don't know. Ask my wife. She could tell you." Preliminary hearings for Patterson, Fowler, and Posey continued to be delayed, waiting in the hope that Gay would recover enough to testify. As of October 7th, the doctors doubted that Gay would ever recall events leading up to Mary's death. Finally, October 20th, the preliminary hearing was set, and they called 18 witnesses. Of course, the witnesses were predominantly people that were at the bar the night of September 11th, and they all admitted they were either drinking a lot or drinking a little. Their memories were shaky at best. Charges against Arch Patterson were dropped in exchange for his statement at the recommendation of the prosecutor. So he was free and clear. He just had to testify. Posey and Fowler's bonds they only charged him at this point with implication in the murder. They were set at $20,000 each. Fowler was out on bond by November the 12th. Posey's attorney requested a reduced bond for him. He was out by December 12th. They reduced his bond to $10,000. The prosecution's case totally depended on Gay recovering his memory. If that didn't happen, all they had was Arch Patterson's statement. No doubt at all, Posey and Fowler didn't count on Gay surviving at all. The trial was finally set for December 27th, 1938. Unbelievably, Harry Bailey was on trial for murder on the same day. He'd been in an altercation at the Curve Inn in which he shot and killed an associate of the owner of the Silver Moon. There wasn't enough time on the docket for both cases, so the Posey-Fowler trial was rescheduled for March 1939. And just as a side note, Harry Bailey was found not guilty in that murder trial, and the incident was ruled self-defense. What are the odds that the trial would happen in March 39? Slim to none. Chaos would erupt in the Boot Heel in January 1939 that would interrupt not only the trial, but thousands of lives as well. Do we have any questions before we move on? Well, I don't see any questions. Okay, we'll wait just another moment in case someone has a question. Next week, June the 9th at 6 p.m., we hope you'll join us again. We'll talk about the sharecropper strike of 1939, the consequences of the New Deal in the justice system. We'll also find out what happened to Gay Vaughn, Posey and Fowler, and the others involved. So I guess if you don't have any questions, this will be our exit, and we will see you next week.
We have a question of, would you share why or how you got interested in this story?
I'm sorry?
We have a question of, would you share how or why you got interested in this story?
Okay, I will share that, but I'm not going to share it tonight. That's part of the story next week. I will tell you that I've been interested in this story I'm pretty old, so it's been decades. And I did a tremendous amount of research. This story is a culmination of years of research and a whole lot of help from my coworkers. I can't thank them enough for helping me get this information. And I think next week, when I share those details with you, you'll be very surprised. So thank you all for coming.